Admiral Krazak's flagship Dawnbreaker exited warp at the edge of Sol system, its command deck buzzing with anticipation. The third conquest fleet stretched behind him, 200 warships strong, their weapons primed to reduce Earth to glowing cinders, like, "Vessels report ready," said Tactical Officer Vix. No sign of... The scanners screamed. Something was wrong with the space between Mars and Jupiter. The asteroid belt moved. Not asteroids. Krazak's mandibles went slack as the tactical display recalculated scale. What they'd mistaken for celestial debris were vessels so massive they bent starlight around their silhouettes, each longer than the Dawnbreaker's entire battle group. "Those aren't defense platforms," whispered Comms Officer Jex. "Those are tombs." Then the first wake-up signal flashed across every Concord channel. Unauthorized entry detected. Terrasol defense grid active. The Leviathans awoke in sequence. The ECS Vengeance. Its hull still bore the scars of a war fought before the Concord species crawled from their primordial oceans. The EDS Thanatos, a spinal-mounted weapon that made black holes look quaint, the Obsidian. Gaze. No visible armaments. Just an endless black surface that watched Krazak's science officer collapsed mid-report, neural implants frying as he tried to comprehend their power sources. "They're not ships. They're..." The Vengeance answered. For him, its comms transmission wasn't audio. It was memory, flooding every mind in the fleet with visions of Earth's last stand against something worse than war. The Leviathan's true purpose. Not weapons, but wardens. The reason they slept, because humanity chose to forget. The Concord fired. Anyway, plasma lances that could gut planets struck the Thanatos' hull and stopped, frozen in space. Then the Leviathan spat them back, not as plasma, but as music, the beams rewritten into a perfect rendition of Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture, played through superheated gas. The accompanying message was almost polite. Lesson 1. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only remixed. Desperate, Krazak ordered boarding parties. The shuttles never reached their targets. Security feeds showed Team Alpha dissolving into their component atoms, Team Beta aging backward into screaming infants, Team Gamma simply ceasing to have ever existed. The Obsidian Gaze transmitted footage of the would-be boarders sitting at a banquet table inside its hull, unharmed but changed. They raised glasses of liquid starlight in toast. Their eyes were human now. The CSV long sight drifted through the corpse of Earth's solar system, its sensors flaring with warnings. Where Sool had once blazed, there now hung a perfect Dyson sphere, its blackened surface pulsing like a dying heartbeat. "They didn't just leave," whispered Tech Officer Barr, his frills pale with shock. "They took the sun with them." Captain Vosk stared at the tactical display. The Leviathans were gone, but their footprints remained. Mercury, dismantled into a trillion self-replicating probes. Venus. Atmosphere compressed into a diamond, the size of a moon Mars. Its canyons now spelled out "try harder" in mile-high letters. Dundee. The distress call came. The science vessel EDS Curiosity floated near Jupiter's ruins, its hull intact but wrong. The ship's alloy had been reforged into a perfect replica of a human nervous system, its corridors pulsing with bioluminescent veins. Boarding teams found the crew, still alive, their bodies fused with the ship's new organic systems, the engines. Now a miniature star contained in a containment field that breathed. The logs, a single repeating message. "Ask us about our fuel efficiency." Chief Engineer Rin touched the pulsating core and remembered. Visions flooded her mind. Leviathan birthrights inside neutron stars, human engineers singing reactors to sleep. The terrible truth. Earth's sun hadn't been stolen. It had been upgraded. The Curiosity's captain, or what was left of him, spoke through the ship's new vocal systems. "You wanted to know how they power their ships?" His laughter shook the hull. "They don't use power. They negotiate with it." The screens flared to life, showing quantum treaties signed with fundamental forces, dark matter trained like Pet's entropy itself being haggled with. Then the kicker, alive. Feed from inside Sol's containment sphere. The sun wasn't burning. It was watching. The Varelian diplomatic envoy ship, Silver Wing, docked with the Terran vessel TNS Behemoth with a soft magnetic clunk. At over 42 kilometers long, the Behemoth wasn't just a ship. It was a floating ecosystem. The Varelians had heard rumors about human starships being large. But standing in the docking tunnel, peering through reinforced viewglass, they realized the term large was a galactic understatement. Envoy First Class Treller Von Cal was a seasoned diplomat. He had visited capital worlds, star forges, even nebula mining colonies. But as he stepped into the hangar bay of the Behemoth, his legs buckled beneath him. It wasn't a room. It was a landscape. Massive modular structures dotted the hangar, each easily the size of a city block. Human dropships, some larger than the entire Silver Wing, were parked on magnetized pads that could hold megaton-class vessels. There were roadways, control towers, gantry cranes the size of skyscrapers, and even what looked like green parks and recreation areas. Artificial daylight bathed everything from above, and an actual atmospheric control system maintained fresh air and live wind currents. Treller blinked. This is the hangar?" he asked aloud, voice trembling. The human escort, a grinning man in a black and red uniform marked with Fleet Engineering, gave a small chuckle. "Nah, this is just Hangar 12C. One of the auxiliary bays. You'll see the real hangars on the tour." Treller almost dropped his translator device. To the Varelians, who evolved on a high-gravity world with subterranean cities, this bay alone looked like an open-sky metropolis. His aides mistook housing blocks for warehouses. One aide even asked if they needed planetary visas to walk through the docking corridor. As they continued forward, the scale only grew more absurd. A logistics tram took them 10 kilometers across an interior concourse. They passed military barracks, hydroponic farms, training fields, industrial foundries, and even a full hospital wing, all contained within the ship. Finally, Treller turned to the human engineer and whispered, "Why build something this vast?" The human's smile faded slightly. "Because we don't build ships to fight in space. We build them to win wars anywhere." Treller suddenly felt very, very small. It wasn't just the scale of the Behemoth. It was the message it sent, that to humans, ships weren't vehicles. They were mobile civilizations prepared to move, fight, and survive for decades without support. They weren't just weapons, they were declarations of intent. By the time the diplomatic meeting began, Treller and his delegation weren't just overwhelmed. They were already conceding. Admiral Sulik of the Zarkathi Strategic Corps prided himself on understanding space warfare. He had studied fleet dynamics for 2 centuries, simulated thousands of battles, and mastered the laws of motion that governed the void. So when he saw the Terran dreadnought TNS Leviathan shift orientation in open space, without deceleration, arcs, engine flares, or gravitational assists, his 4 hearts skipped in unison. "That's not possible," he muttered. The Leviathan was over 60 kilometers in length. By all known laws of physics, something of that mass should take hours to turn. It should have required massive counter-thrust. Fuel expenditure alone should have crippled its systems. Instead, it pivoted like a fighter drone, sleek, smooth, deliberate, and fast. The bridge of the Zarkathi flagship fell silent. Tactical readouts recalculated again and again, all returning the same conclusion. The human vessel had changed vector in under 90 seconds against 30 million metric tons of mass. Someone whispered, "Inertial dampeners?" But at that scale? Admiral Sulik's mandibles twitched. "No," he replied grimly. "This isn't dampening. This is inertia defiance." The Leviathan moved not as a ship should, but as if inertia itself had been negotiated with and overridden. Its engines didn't roar, they whispered. Its gravimetric signature bent space around it like liquid. Then the dreadnought activated its forward batteries. A swarm of railgun projectiles emerged, not arcing, not compensating for spin, but moving in a straight line, unimpeded, unaltered, by the movement of the ship. The Zarkathi AI panicked. It couldn't calculate a trajectory. There was no delay, no drag, no lag between ship motion and fire control. It was like watching a mountain swim. Admiral Sulik had one thought as the first. Salvo annihilated his outer cruisers. We were never fighting a navy. We were watching physics lose an argument. Across the surface of Kelvaris Prime, skies turned red. Not from fire, but from the reflection of something massive descending through the atmosphere. Civilians fled inland. Planetary defenses scrambled. The entire command structure of the planetary shield network had one question echoing through their halls. Why is it so quiet? There had been no weapons fire, no declarations of war, no show of force, just a single transmission, delivered in a calm, measured voice. The translator rendered it in perfect Kelvaran dialect. To all personnel on Kelvaris Prime, this is Commander Elias Grant of the TNS Cataclysm. We advise immediate evacuation from coastal zones. Repeat, this is not a threat. It is a courtesy. And then, nothing. No fleet in orbit. No signature of orbital bombardment. Only gravity, pressure, and silence. The kind of silence that presses against the bones until it appeared. The cataclysm broke through the atmosphere like a second moon descending. Over 110 kilometers long, with hull plating the color of scorched metal, it moved without sonic booms, without turbulence, as if the atmosphere parted willingly. Seas churned before it touched the horizon. Tidal patterns shifted. Water rose on the opposite side of the planet. The ship's mass didn't merely fall into the sky. It commanded space itself to accommodate its presence. The Planetary Defense Command tried to lock onto it. They couldn't. The cataclysm didn't register as a standard object. To sensors, it was both there and not. Its hull lined with quantum shielding, its silhouette bending electromagnetic waves. Even gravity sensors couldn't get a fixed read. Admiral Vashkor, overseeing the defense grid, screamed orders. Target the ship. Fire all surface-to-orbit batteries. But before the command completed, the ship stopped. Mid-air. Not in orbit. Not on the ground. Just floating. Its mass alone should have shattered tectonic plates, but somehow the energy ripple, contained, moved around the ship like a gravitational lens. And then came the lights. Beams of pure kinetic plasma projected, downward not as weapons but as anchors. They didn't destroy. They flattened, carving out massive, symmetrical landing pads into the crust of the planet without harming any cities or populations. It was like watching a god settle onto the world with surgical intent. From the cataclysm, hundreds of smaller vessels detached. Not warships, hospital frigates, relief drones, engineering crawlers. They landed with medical supplies, food, water, and equipment for rebuilding. The Kelvarans stood stunned. Commander Elias Grant's voice returned one last time. You screamed. Someone had to come. We bring peace and backup generators. The Yao battlefield over the neutral zone of Yalaris Drift lay in stunned silence. The vastness of space was briefly interrupted by the awestruck stillness of an entire armada, a coalition of 17 alien species, watching the aftermath of a short but catastrophic skirmish. Debris from their most powerful warships drifted, past sensor arrays in chunks no larger than a grain silo. The reason? A human fleet had entered contested space unannounced, and without firing a single shot in aggression, had disabled half of the alien coalition's forward fleet through sheer electronic warfare, jamming precision, and psychological warfare tactics. The Toy ships were enormous, hulking silhouettes of dark alloy and humming power cores that dwarfed anything the coalition had ever seen. Towering spires jutted from their dorsal fins, leaking radiation signatures like beacons of doom. Entire alien crews refused to engage them directly, believing they were looking at Earth's elite war caste. One Ithari general whispered over comms, "If these are the Terran capital ships, we cannot win this war." But they had to be sure, which is why, after the humiliating withdrawal, a diplomatic envoy was sent to parley under truce. Their goal, to demand the appearance of the actual human main fleet. They believed the vessels they encountered couldn't possibly represent Earth's frontline forces. No one would send dreadnoughts that massive as scouts or escorts, right, Admiral? Pierce, the human fleet commander, met them aboard a diplomatic relay station orbiting Yelaris Prime. Clad in a black Terran Navy uniform and flanked by two silent Marines, he stood casually at the window as the alien envoy delivered their demand. "We are not deceived," hissed the Rixari delegate. "Those titanic constructs are clearly your war fleet. We require full transparency. Bring out your main force." Pierce didn't even turn to face them at first. He simply sipped his coffee, glanced at the drifting wreckage of ships still flickering in the distance, and finally said, "Main force? Oh no. Those big boys? Just escorts. We brought smaller ones too." The room went dead silent. One of the alien delegates, a Felnari tactician with 8 independently blinking eyes, stammered, "Smaller? How can you call those things escorts?" Pierce smiled thinly and reached for a data pad. A few gestures. Later, a hologram bloomed into view above the table. Smaller ships, faster, sleeker, with weapons arrays that pulsed at such a rapid cycle they appeared to shimmer. They weren't built to intimidate. They were built to finish fights before they started. Stealth corvettes, hunter-killers, AI-driven swarms, and gravitic strike craft with jump capability independent of any gate. "These," Pierce said, tapping the screen, "are the ones we send when we want things quiet. The big ones, they just get the other guy's attention." He paused, then leaned in slightly. "You should have hoped they were the main fleet." No one in that room said a word, and, from that day forward, no coalition ship entered Terran-claimed space again.